And over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Peter, and thanks, GRDC, and thanks, everyone, for being here. I've been on this tour a little bit before, so hopefully I've managed to keep the time. Can I borrow your mic, please? That's going to make it a lot better. So everyone, there's already been discussion about frost and why there's not a wheat variety that's not tolerant to frost. Well, there actually is. It's just called oats. Obviously, we've got a little bit of work to do to make sure that we can get the back end of it out the door. But this example here is pretty clear. So this was the trial we had at Holt Rock last year, out back east. And there's three sets of numbers here, and really the simplest way of looking at it is the main season wheat trial. This is the stage 4 wheat trial that Dan Mullen runs out there. It was planned 21st of May. The oat NVT went in at the same time, and it wasn't a fault of anyone. It was just a logistic issue. There wasn't some seed here, but it's just a really clear example. So you can see that that 21st of May sowing window. You can see there the 5 highest yielding lines for wheat. Rockstar is about the only one you could actually plant at the 27th of April, Anzac Day. It's about the only one you could plant, and even then you're kind of pushing the front envelope of the sowing window a little bit out there. You can see there that Rockstar is at 4.5 tonnes. Mean yield for the trial of 4 tonnes, which is about double what the NVT went. As I said, it was just a logistic thing. Everyone knows oats should be planted early, and had a good chat to Ash about that this morning. But you can see that when we did get our trial in earlier, the 27th of April, Anzac Day-ish, you can see there that all of our lines are actually in that trial. The site average for the stage 4 trials was basically 5 tonnes, and considering that the material that we had out there hadn't really been out there that far east, other than in South Australia, before in its life, is a really good sign that we had good genetic potential out there. But the main thing to note is that these 2 lines in bold, 14 30951 and 13 88-18 were in NVT as well. You can see the numbers there, but you can see that in the NVT they're a long way behind Rockstar, long way. But in the Anzac Day zone, they're a tonne ahead of Rockstar. So that's just the potential that you get for planting earlier. And a tonne is exactly the number that Ash told me this morning, so I'm pretty happy with that. So this is the NVT from last year, the Met data. So InterGrain, we've actually fast-tracked some lines. So one of the things that InterGrain have said in the expression of interest of commercialising the old SARDI National Oat Breeding Program was that we would decrease the time it takes to get a variety from cross to market, so growers can realise the genetic potential sooner. So we have done some fast tracking. These 2 lines here were the highest yielding lines in WA and nationally from the Met. 14309-51 was only in WA because of seed volumes, not a lot of seed. It was a stage 3 line the previous year, but you can see we've gone through, and you can see down the bottom down here the lines that haven't performed so well: Corribup, Durack, Carolup, etc. A long way off the pace. So part of what we've done this year with the NVT is we've streamlined what we put into NVT, and we're going hard at these 5 varieties in the grain space in particular. So 1388-18, the highest yielding line in NVT last year. Pretty excited about it. We've actually got some production happening right now. We'll also have some seed going to summer nursery so that we can really crank it up. The one thing about 1388-18, not only was the highest yielding line, it also had the highest test weight. So we're talking a couple of units ahead of Bannister, and it also had lower screenings. Again, a couple of units below Bannister for screening. So really good ability to fill grain. Currently, beta-glucan, etc., all looks about on par with Bannister. We're fully exploring dual purpose this year, and it's actually in the NHA trials in WA and some of the ones in East Coast. So we'll really work that out. It does look like it's got a bit of ability for dual purpose, but we haven't actually tested that fully yet. The next one is 14309-51. That was also an NVT last year, same yield as 1388-18. It's got a very similar disease profile, so there's no advantage there. Whereas with 1388-18, it's actually we're seeing it a tick better, 1 notch better than Bannister, 1 notch better than Williams. So in between Corribup and Williams is what we're seeing. So we're really excited about that. This line here I probably won't talk about today because it's actually got smashed by Septoria, but we know that it does really well for oat crown rust, which is a disease that they find in the east, leaf rust, as we call it over here in the west. But considering that red leather leaf has made its way from east coast to west coast recently. We know that, and it always happens, we know that the bad stuff from the east comes to the west, and yes, I am from the east. It will eventually get its way over here. So, that's why we need to make sure that we're continuing to test lines like this in this part of the world. And these two new lines here are quite exciting. Both of them are 6-7% ahead of Bannister in the Mets from the 2018 through to 2021 seasons. Obviously less data than Bannister, but looking really good at the moment. Both of these lines have actually got Bannister as one parent. Disease profiles are quite similar, but they're actually shorter than Bannister, so sort of a bilby height of one of them is even a little bit shorter, which might be good for people who are trying to keep wheat and barley out of their oats. Septoria is the biggest issue in WA for disease, of course. This is the next lot of material we've got coming through that's actually good for Septoria. So this is Corrubup. It's MRMS, which is considered the best line at the moment for Septoria. We've actually got nothing better than Corrubup, but we have several lines that are as good as Corrubup, and you can see their yield performance. Interestingly, the ones highlighted in that colour are actually they're introduced parents, and so we'll talk about them in a little bit more detail later on. But you can see that we've got some material there that's actually looking quite good. Just so you know, Bannister comes in around about here. So you can see we actually do have quite a few lines that are higher yielding than Bannister. This one here in particular is actually quite exciting. We have some research in Septoria and other projects, thanks mostly to the GRDC dollars. So we're working through some areas there. We also have got a what's called the Processed Oat Growth Partnership, which WA government has put some money into, and so we've got some more research linkages in there and leveraging off GRDC investment as well. And InterGrain we're actually growing our own Septoria nursery this year, where we can do a lot more screening, so screen all the lines through the entire breeding program, stage 1 and up, whereas previously we only do stage 2 and up. And obviously we've got bigger numbers than what SARDI were running. But the other part of it is we can also put in some populations where we can do single plant selection for improved Septoria tolerance. So some of the research that's been done by SARDI in particular has identified a few lines that have come over from the US, from Quaker, PepsiCo Quaker in the Northern Hemisphere, that actually are quite good for Septoria. So there's one parent in there, for example, that we've got in a few crosses that's actually an MR for Septoria so far across a few years. And so we've now got segregating populations of that line with Bannister, Williams and a few others that we've got at our site at Muresk, where we can actually make sure that it's getting smashed with Septoria, and there will be plants in there that die this year because we had a really good stubble load from last year. We've loaded up with inoculum and it's cranking hard, but should be able to pick out something that's better. And so I had a question before about how we can make sure that oats we can screen, or barley, for example, we can screen the coleoptile length or mesocoleoidal length. You can't transfer it from wheat across, but what we do know is the selection toolbox. The way we select is actually set up now. We can do it, and this is what this is about. But the main thing to really show here is that this little picture down the right, down here in this bottom corner, we all know the biggest issue with oats, especially into a dry finish, is keeping test weight and screenings under control. So we can now actually take images of the panicle before we thresh it. So we can actually say, you know what, this one, look at the individual distribution of the seed on the panicle, and start to do some research in that regard, so that we can work out where the fault's coming from. Is the third grain on a whirl or whatever it's called, is that the problem, or do we need to get rid of that, or is it a case of it's all small and work through it in that way, where the issue's coming from? Sorry, I'm going to talk a bit more about hay now, Peter. I know I always talk about hay. It's not quite the flavour of the month, but there is some exciting material coming out still in that program. So we had our launch of Archer a couple of weeks ago. So Archer is the latest IMI-tolerant line we brought out for the hay space. There is obviously no ability to put Archer or King Bale into the CBH system for delivery, and that's really just ensuring we're not making sure we're ensuring we're having no issues around market access. If some grain got into the system with an MRL issue for IMI, then we'd be in trouble as an industry in Australia, and we wouldn't be able to continue exporting. So we're just making sure at this point there's a lot of legwork to go through. So we spoke about the IMI lines being King Bale and Archer. There they are. And remembering, of course, these two lines were actually bred by GRIA through a mutagenesis process, which is exactly how we got scope in barley in the first place in the early wheats. So again, leveraging off what's happened in other crops. We also have 2 new conventional hay lines that we're releasing. So these are directly from the old SARDI program that would normally be launched by AXCO. InterGrain and AXCO and SARDI have agreed to terms, and where InterGrain will launch them. The plan being hopefully that in a couple of years' time that InterGrain are standing there talking about all the varieties, because they're all coming under our umbrella, just making sure that we can answer every question. I'll tell you a little bit about these 2 varieties. So Coltar is a high yielding line. So these are relative numbers. So 104 means that it's 4% ahead of Wallaby, Kingbar, Yalara, for example. So it's 4 or 5% ahead of Brusher for yield. It's a tall plant type, so apparently it's as tall as Swan, which apparently is up to here. If you give it enough nitrogen, you can see that its quality profile is not great as compared to some of the other lines, but it's kind of in that same ballpark as Corobup, maybe even a little bit better. And it's definitely should be suitable for export quality, and it's got a fairly decent disease package for this part of the world. Wallaby is so that line is actually sort of in between a Yalara and a Mulgara for maturity. So being a few days quicker than a Bannister or a Brusher, a few days longer than a Brusher. Sorry. The other new line is Wallaby. So Wallaby is sort of more of your standard height for a hay type, sort of that Bannister height, give or take. It's also got high biomass. It's the same biomass as Brusher, etc., Carolup. The main attraction of Wallaby is its really high quality profiles, especially digestibility and sugar. So a high WSC means that you can actually should make these 2 traits in particular should hit export hay more often and the premium grades. And the other thing is too, with that high WSC, you should be able to push it harder with a little bit more nitrogen early on to make sure that you get it up and away without actually falling out of spec, because it's got a high WSC to start with. In hay, there's some challenges that we face. There's a bigger gap in the hay market, in the hay program. And every breeder will say the same thing. There's always that trade-off between quality and yield. It's no exception in hay. These here are just correlations. Basically, we want if we want to have a high hay yield, we want to have high digestibility, high WC, low fibre, high protein. But you can see that all the correlations are going the wrong way. So basically, in other words, if we select for hay yield alone, we're going backwards for WSC. And vice versa, and so on and so forth. If we look at the stage, so that was the stage 2 trial. So these are basically unselected for any trait going into last year's trials. Remembering that SARDI were unable to do remote sensing, drone work, etc. If we go into the stage 4, where they'd actually been able to do some manual cuts, you can see here that those digestibilities and WCs, etc., are still going the wrong way, but they're actually better. So that's the improvement. So we've actually we know that if we select for hay yield at the same time as we select for quality parameters, that we can make simultaneous gains. So that's obviously good. But the next trick is how we actually drive selection intensity further and faster, because cutting hay is not a fun game. So at InterGrain, we've been investing in drone technology for a while. This year is one of our Inspire drones. So it's just got 4 blades on it. It flies a bit. That little Altum sensor there has got is what we call a multispectral sensor. So it actually shoots 5 wavelengths at the crop, which lets us estimate NDVI, which everyone knows what that is, and NDRE. NDRE is actually is a better version of NDVI, basically, on the red edge spectrum. So it's actually another wavelength that's actually shot from the camera to the crop, and that gives you a better resolution for biomass. That sensor is about a 20 grand sensor, so it's obviously technology. The one thing that InterGrain have really been able to do with some of our research linkages is how to actually turn pretty pictures into numbers. Drones have been around for a long time, but it's only been recently we've worked out how to to do feature extraction, as we call it, to turn pretty pictures into numbers, which is what we need to do analysis with. So if we look at what that means when it comes to the real world, ABV is above ground volume, NDVI, NDRE, the two traits there, they're 90% correlated. So on a fuel gauge level, I can say that something's really good or is better than average with high confidence. So what this lets me do is say, in my stage naught trials, I can actually go and plan a whole heap of lines, and I can actually put something on basically a 1 to 5 scale for biomass, and very with great confidence I can say, okay, I'm going to get rid of the bads and the very bads, and just keep the goods and better, and then do some quality testing on them in the next year. Previously, SARDI used to do that all by eye. And I guess one of the real tricks of that is if we actually go in and estimate biomass, if we're talking about $6 for manpower, person power, just to take the cut. Once you process it, it's another cost again. But it costs about $6 to do a biomass cut by the time you get there and blah, blah, blah. We can predict them with the drones for about 20 cents. So what this will enable us is to make sure that our stage, the lines going from stage 0 to stage 1, they're all good for biomass. And then we can work harder at growing at hay quality. But we're also working at hay quality at the moment. So this here is a $2 million piece of kit. It's got a full hyperspectral imaging in here, plus a LiDAR. It's just more wavelengths. And we know that we can actually, from work that I was doing 10 years ago in Cyro, we know that WSC we can work out with hyperspectral imaging, and we are. Like it's on a fuel gauge level, it's probably a 1 to 3. It's good, it's average, or it's bad. But again, it gives me the ability to discard earlier in the program. We've actually got a project up with AgriFutures, where we're looking at how we can actually turn this sensor into one of these sensors, and give it to agros and give it to growers, so that you can actually go out and fly your own hay paddocks, a week before when you start to making decisions about cutting. It's okay, that's a low value crop. This is a high value crop based off sugar and some other traits. So there's a bit of work to go there, but it's quite exciting. That we're trying to make sure that this grower can get to this technology can get to the growers. Of course, I'm not happy going 20 metres up. I want to go thousands of kilometres up, but satellites can't quite do it yet. But we're working on it. One of the things that InterGrain said we'd do is we'd have a bigger selection pipeline, but we'd go faster. These are the numbers from the SARDI program that was running. Obviously, the last couple of years they were running down. You can see here we're at 34,000 yield plots. SARDI were at about 16 at their peak. So we've moved more than double the program. And we're also doing it faster. So this here is the old SARDI program. Wallaby and Coulter are actually 16 years old now. They're being launched at the moment. And that's what InterGrain will get to over there on the right, about 9 or 10 years. 13008-18 is the first one off the rank, and it'll probably be, fingers crossed, launched in 2024. So it's still 11 years. But considering where we received it, I think it's still pretty good. So the key messages for me really are that we're going to build off the gains that have been made by the previous programs, and across the time frame, thanks to all the investment that's happened and the people who've worked there previously. We're fast tracking some lines. We really make sure that we will test dual purposability, if that's a word, much earlier in the program than what had happened previously. So stage 4 lines in the grain program will go into the hay program, and vice versa. And next year we'll probably even start doing the stage 3s like that, so we can really test it out. We can understand when we're releasing a variety whether it's going to make it for both types or not. We're fast tracking the line. The grain program's been in pretty good shape. We do need to kick it up, and so we can catch back up to wheat and barley. And other crops, because they've gone further forward than what Oats has lately. Hay program's got a gap, but we've got the tech to catch up. And a big acknowledgement to the team. We really started out on a wing and a prayer in last year. We got the seed at Horsham 6th of May. 5 weeks later, we had 4,000 plots in the ground. Remember, you got to get seed from Victoria to to Western Australia. Sorry, it's about a week in transit. Plus, you've got to lose a couple of days for quarantine. So we did pretty good. We beat the grower to the paddock, which was obviously nice, wasn't it, Ash? And everything else is up there to be read. So thank you for your time, everyone.
Sure.
You can go.
Okay.
Just questions, please. 5 minutes for questions. We've got time.
I use the mic because we're on recording. Anybody? Yep, Gary.
Always ask a question.
Well,
Everyone else.
well, you lead. Alan, is it correct as a oat grower, not a hay grower? Yeah, is it costing some oat yield and quality and so on by looking for dual purpose oats all the time, or should they be separate programs?
In the long term, I can tell you hand on heart, if we wanted to ramp up investment, the best way to go would be to breed for grain versus breeding for hay, and keep them separately. But at the moment, the problem is that there's actually, because the hay program is quite new, there's still a lot of genetic similarity anyway. And so whilst that's still in the system, we want to take advantage of it and make sure that we've got the ability to look at either systems. Of course, every grower knows that if you've got one genotype that can fit in multiple crop types, then it gives you flexibility in your system, which is an effective insurance policy. So that's really what we're looking at the moment. In 10 years' time, yeah, we may actually have completely separate programs again, like what Sadi were doing. But all we're doing, I will have a completely separate grain program and a completely separate hay program. We're just making sure that we actually cross-pollinate between the two. And as we go forward, that'll also make sure, because we actually have 2 buckets of funding money. We have these guys plus AgriFuture. So I'm not going to say I'm double dipping, but I might be.
Question back to Gary. Do you want to grow 2 varieties of oats, one for hay, one for grain, or do you want a dual purpose?
If you can give me, yeah, I'd imagine you do, because you just they're not the same beast.
Given that if you grow one for both, you'll probably have a 5 or 10% yield decline in either way.
Yeah, well then I'm not growing. Well, it's probably a better question for Ash, who grows grain and hay, rather than myself, who doesn't grow hay.
No, I think.
It's all about the money.
Yeah, I think dual purpose is less and less a thing. Hay growers grow hay and grain growers grow grain. So I think it's a nice fallback. It's like, when you can bale your frosted wheat because you've got biomass there, it's a nice fallback, but it's probably not the main aim.
Completely agree, but Carrolup is still 20% of the district. So.
Oh,
yeah. Alan, what's your plan going forward about what you envisage releasing in terms of numbers of varieties a year, as this, as you get to that year 9 and 10? I'm just thinking about the industry classifying new varieties coming in.
Yeah, so we're really keen to make sure that in the grain process, in the oat grain, there's actually a classification process, kind of similar to what happens in barley. What we're talking about as we go forward. And because at the moment, to classify an oat variety in Western Australia, you need to have 2 lots of 50-tonne go through the mill. And currently that all happens mostly with Quaker. Sometimes Uni are taking a sample is what they're talking about, but it's a pretty big impulse. So we've got to make sure that we're only doing it with lines that we're really confident are going to make it. I've penciled 1 in for next year, and I don't quite know which one it'll be. It'll be one of those 2, either 13-008-18 or 14-309-51. But yeah, so there will be a process similar to barley where there's kind of internal data, and then there's a pilot mill situation in between, and then there's the big mill. As far as how many varieties we'll release, I believe that we'll be talking about there'll be a few varieties that come out in the next couple of years, especially in the grain space. We've just put 4 out in the hay space effectively. But I can imagine that in the next couple of years, or probably 3 or 4 years, we'll be putting out 3 or 4 grain varieties. There'll be a bit of a gap in the hay system, and then we'll bring out a couple more after that. But once we get past that, I really believe it's probably going to be 1 variety per crop type every 12 to 24 months, and we won't be releasing out thousands of varieties. Remembering InterGrain will be the only breeding program for both grain oats and hay oats.
Herbicide spraying?
No, look, it's something we're really keen on, and obviously not just IMI. We do want to have more chemicals that we can work with, but we do need to remember in the grain space, in particular, that as Richard Simon said this morning, we're trying to sell this to the hippies. We're not just selling it to the hippies at Freo. I live at Freo, and I'm not a hippie. But we are trying to sell it to the hippies overseas who actually have a very high tolerance for those sort of things, and they don't want to hear that there's an MRL issue for anything. As soon as they do, it'll be shut the gate. So we need to be really careful about that. Is it something that we've said no to in 10 years' time? No, we haven't said that, but at the moment we're saying no for the next few years. But we are continuing to work in that space. Or did I say that out loud? Sorry. Don't tell Trez I said that out loud.
We'll delete that out of the
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think that's about it.
Thanks all.
Was there any more questions? All good. Okay, so just I guess a wrap up just for those who haven't been following the news about the oat breeding program. GRDC, from your levies, chips in $500,000 a year or something, along with AgriFutures. The state government chips in a bit. It has been an industry and government supported breeding program. We hope that in 4 years' time it'll be a fully commercial, private industry funded breeding program like wheat and oats are now, and we'll be able to take that $500,000 a year and invest it somewhere else. Into oat research.
Breeding research.
Yeah, so really wish you success.